Mountains cover roughly 25% of Earth's land surface. They're home to more than 85% of the planet's amphibian, bird, and mammal species. Mountains are sometimes even called water towers, as they provide between 60 and 80% of all of Earth's fresh water. And finally, mountains are responsible for attracting 20% of all global tourism. So clearly, mountains are both important habitats and resources. But this all raises the question, what exactly is a mountain? That question is not quite as easy to answer as you may expect. Hi, I'm Alex, and I talk about mountains, so be sure to subscribe for more mountain and geography content. Now, believe it or not, mountains are incredibly difficult features to define, and there's no widely accepted definition for what constitutes a mountain. If you were to Google, what is a mountain, you'd find common sources such as Wikipedia, Encyclopedia Britannica, or National Geographic, all providing some variation of the broad, vague definition that a mountain is a landform that rises prominently above its surroundings. And while that's definitely true, that vague definition doesn't really allow us to determine what a mountain is. And it certainly doesn't allow us to easily distinguish between mountains and other similar landforms. For example, what's the difference between a mountain and a hill, which is defined as a naturally raised area of land? Now, mountains and hills are easy to distinguish when we look at extreme ends of the spectrum. On one hand, almost everybody would agree that Mount Everest deserves to be classified as a mountain and not a hill. On the other hand, I'd be willing to bet that most people would classify this landscape, which is the Palouse in eastern Washington, as a series of hills and not mountains. But things get a little bit more complicated as we move closer to the middle. At what point does a hill actually become a mountain? Take this landscape, for example. Would you classify these features as hills or mountains? They're actually the Porcupine Mountains located on Michigan's Upper Peninsula. But I'd guess that most people watching this video would classify them as hills based on their appearance alone. So how can we more easily distinguish between hills and mountains? Well, we can start by tightening our definition of the word mountain. Some definitions do provide constraints, stating that mountains tend to have steep sides, exposed bedrocks, and relatively isolated summits. But while stricter definitions of the word mountain may allow us to more easily distinguish between mountains and other landforms, they're far from perfect because they tend to exclude some mountains that don't contain all or even any of these traits. Consider Mauna Loa, which is a shield volcano located on the Big Island of Hawaii. Mauna Loa is actually one of the 3 largest mountains in the entire world. But as we can see from this footage here, it certainly doesn't have steep slopes. What about the Appalachian Mountains? They're one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world and one of the major mountain ranges in North America. Yet, because of their age and the climate that they're located in, they have very little exposed bedrock. And finally, think of Grand Mesa on Colorado's western slope. It's widely considered to be the largest flat-top mountain in the world, so kind of by definition, it doesn't have a well-confined summit. So just adding a bunch of specific constraints to the definition of mountain doesn't really help because oftentimes it ends up excluding landforms that almost everybody would consider to be a mountain. So what else can we use to help define a mountain? Well, what about elevation? Most people tend to associate landforms such as hills with lower elevations and mountains with higher elevations. But just like there's no widely accepted definition of the term mountain, there's also no widely accepted threshold for where a hill transitions into a mountain. I think this has to do largely with the fact that people's ideas of the term mountain vary significantly depending on where they live. Going back to a previous example, people from Michigan may consider the Porcupine Mountains to be mountains, simply because they are higher elevation and more rugged than any terrain for miles around in an otherwise flat part of the country. People in Colorado, on the other hand, may scoff at the idea of anything below the tree line as being considered a mountain. Even more extreme still, I have several friends in Nepal that only consider peaks that are permanently covered in snow to be mountains. That last definition would eliminate almost every peak in the United States, outside of a handful of volcanoes in the Cascades Range, as well as some of the larger mountains in Alaska. So it makes sense, to me at least, that there wouldn't be a universal elevation threshold for the transition from hills to mountains. But even beyond the fact that there's no universal elevation threshold, most countries don't even have regional elevation thresholds for defining the transition between hills and mountains within their own borders. In fact, the United Kingdom is one of the only countries on Earth that does have a threshold. The UK considers any landform above 2,000 feet or 610 meters to be a mountain, while anything that falls beneath that threshold to be a hill. Because they have such a strict definition, the UK has something that a lot of countries don't, and that's an official lowest mountain. It's called Calf Top, and it has an elevation of exactly 2,000 feet or 610 meters. But let's think about this for a second. Looking at this picture, if Calf Top was 1 foot lower, so 1,999 feet above sea level, would you think of it any differently? If you already believed that Calf Top was a mountain, would 1 foot difference in elevation completely change your mind to the point that you're thinking, oh, never mind, that's definitely a hill? Probably not. And that's the reason that I think having an official elevation threshold is a better idea on paper than it is when applied in reality. So clearly, defining a mountain isn't as easy as you'd think. None of the methods I talked about in this video really allow us to determine what exactly is a mountain. Now, you could go one step further and start considering more advanced attributes such as topographic relief, prominence, isolation, and other metrics, but even these have shortcomings, as I'll explain in my next video. So, at the end of the day, I think that every single person is going to have their own unique definition of what actually constitutes a mountain. Some people may consider everything above tree line to be mountain. Some people might consider anything with a certain elevation might be a mountain. And other people might have definitions that I haven't even thought of. This may be frustrating, but I think it's a good thing, and it leads to some fun conversations about what's considered a mountain and what isn't. What do you consider a mountain? And what metrics do you use to help make that decision? What metrics do you think that the world should use to help define mountains? Let me know in the comments, and again, be sure to subscribe for more mountain and geography videos, and thanks for watching.